Hello everyone. Thank you so much for attending this webinar today. We're very happy to have all of you here. As you know that today is World Mental Health Day. In the wake of the pandemic, something that we've all been experiencing for the last year and a half, there's been a lot of suffering, a lot of loss that financially, either through a loss of a loved one. And keeping that in mind, the theme for this year is mental health in an unequal world. The WHO found that the suffering that people have experienced has been unequal in many ways, with students and healthcare and frontline workers experiencing increased suffering as they were the warriors during this fight against coronavirus. So we have an expert group of panelists today that will be discussing this topic. I am Namrita. I'm going to be moderating the webinar today. The current webinar that we are organizing is in partnership with IDFC First Bank and the Banyan Academy of Leadership and Mental Health. This is being organized under the Center for Trauma Studies and Innovation at the Banyan Academy. Here we conduct a lot of research and awareness and training programs associated with trauma. I'm quickly going to be introducing our panelists and we'll jump right into the webinar. So our first panelist is our esteemed very own Dr. Lakshmi Ravikant. She is the co-dean of PALM and she's also an assistant professor at the Department of Psychology. She's a service provider, conducts training and development, vocational training and skill development, along with strategic planning at the Banyan. Thank you so much for coming here, ma'am. Our next panelist is Ms. Sadaf Vida. Sadaf has done a master's in clinical psychology from TIS. She's been a practicing service provider since 2015. She has worked in coach settings under the project called Sukoon by TIS, Mumbai, as well as in the mental health startup ecosystem and the school. She has authored and co-authored a number of national and international papers in psychology. She has also published articles for the Chakkars, Waddle, and many other media platforms. She is also listed on iCall, Supu, Pinklist, and other such platforms. She's also a certified queer affirmative counseling therapist with Mariwala Health Initiative and an art-based therapist. Moving on, we also have Ms. Rachna here, who is representing IDFC Bank. Ms. Rachna leads CSR at IDFC. She's also a graduate from TIS. She has over a decade of experience working with non-profit organizations, social enterprises, and incubators. Driven by her own lived experience, she also works actively in the mental health sector to spread awareness, create support programs, and as an advisor to inclusion programs. Lastly, we have Nandini, and Nandini is a peer leader at the Banyan. She has Nandini here represents someone who has undergone lived experience in mental health. She came to Banyan and she has vigorously worked as a case manager, understanding the pathway to homelessness and recovery. She is determined to work with the data entry team, and she works with NALAM workers or frontline healthcare workers at the Banyan with this Center for Social Needs and Livelihoods Department. Thank you everyone for being here. I will now hand over to Ranjita Gunasekharan, who is going to continue moderating the session today.
Hi. Yes, I can see everybody. Hi, welcome to the session. Sorry for joining a bit late, had some technical issues. So as Namrata has mentioned, the theme is inequality and mental health in an unequal world. So we're going to be talking about broadly, we will start with questions on inequality and experiences with mental health. And then we're going to look at the role of stakeholders in the ecosystem before wrapping up with some possible solutions from what we have, from our experiences from research and so on. So I think the first question I'd like to direct at Nandini, who is a peer educator at the Banyan. Nandini, can you talk about your experiences with mental health?
And if your person is having mental health problem, means he will be not only hated by the world, they'll be hated by their parents also and family members.
Okay. And how did you try to access care? Like, did you face any barriers in trying to access care?
I have faced many of the barriers, ma'am.
Okay.
While I was going to job and earning, at that time they was giving me a lot of happiness in my family. After I get this problem, only my parents was taking care of me. And other than my parents, everybody started disliking me.
Okay. So how did you manage to come to the Banyan?
After coming to Banyan, I got nice friends who have seen me beyond my mental illness problem. They supported me a lot, and they give me an employment and made me to live independently.
Okay. Okay. And what do you think helped you? Do you think that inequality, like the kind of background that you came from, in any way affected how you were able to get help and support?
I say generally answer for this question, ma'am. There is surely an inequality applied in the society. If especially ladies have a mental illness problem, means there will be general violence and they'll be used as a sexual abusement also.
Yeah.
They won't have the proper rights for them.
Right. Does anybody else want to talk about their experience with mental health? Any of the panelists? I can tell you something about my experience, which is that I've been diagnosed with major depressive disorder, and I've been on treatment and medication from 2008, though it was undiagnosed for a very long time because of stigma and lack of awareness and so on. But of course, for me, the barriers were not knowing, and as I said, stigma, because even though my father is highly educated, when I told him, his first reaction was, is it my fault? And please don't take medicines. It'll do all kinds of things to you. So, but I have the privilege of being able to access care. So there are so many inequalities linked with accessing care and treatment, and also being able to thrive while living with mental health. Can Dr. Lakshmi perhaps talk to us a little bit about how inequality is linked with mental health?
Sure. Thank you, Ranjita. Good to see you after so long.
Yeah.
And hello to everyone else who's here on the panel. I hope you can hear me, all of you. Yeah, you can hear me. And primarily, I guess all of you who are here on the panel and so many other friends who probably have joined, aware that I have been working with the Banyan and the Banyan Academy of Leadership and Mental Health for over 28 years. So I am not going to make what I'm going to say too generalized, first of all, I think what I'd like to say is that when we're looking at, first of all, the topic, mental health, in an unequal world. I mean, this is a double jeopardy, First of all, the world is not equal. Let's face that. And on top of that, we talk about, when we say mental health, I think the allusion is to mental illness, or mental unwellness when we talk about that. We don't even say mental illness, we say mental health. If people had mental health, then even then we still live in an unequal world. But this is a double jeopardy. The point I'm trying to make, Ranjita, if I've got your a question or statement right, is that one of the largest challenges, particularly working with homeless mentally ill persons, I won't say women alone, men, children, and women across the length and breadth of the country with the, with social, structural barriers like poverty, caste, creed, gender, and all of those things that prevail upon them. So homelessness, poverty here really means the most ultra vulnerable poor people who, have no access to any kind of care, in the first place. So I'm just going to talk about 3 points, and maybe we can open it out to discussion. One is the inequality of access to treatment and care. That could be due to several reasons. Inequality of access to treatment and care could stem from the geography that you arise from, could stem from the family structures, could stem from the fact that there is no access to a clinic or to a mental health professional. Therefore we see widening of treatment and care gaps, both in urban and rural areas. It's not specific to only urban areas, but also in rural areas. People don't know where to go. As you said rightly, the stigma, and then the wishing it away. They just talk about, oh, marriage did this to you, childbirth did that to you, you failed in an examination. I'm talking very brass tack stuff, and therefore either it's wished away as if you'll be fine, or mental health, it's seen as a mental weakness. Very often people with mental health issues are afraid to come out after a long time of endurance of suffering, because they don't want to seem vulnerable and weaker than they already are, particularly women. So that's one of the things. And I don't want to give solutions now, but there are. Then the other thing that really bothers us is, while, okay, you may have access to treatment and care through certain means and certain ways of navigating your course, maybe through a stakeholder, through an NGO, through somebody, a pathfinder for you, maybe, let's say you find access to treatment and care. Then one of the things that happens in inequality is access to unequal social care benefits. Lack of housing, lack of sanitation, lack of basic amenities, let's say like food, shelter, clothing, and pandemic is not the only example. We've seen the lack of, access to social care benefits when it is improvisioned in many laws, in the Constitution. We look at lack of employment, maybe lack of pensions, lack of allowances, and so on and so forth. I mean, these really mean a lot, because for particularly people with homelessness or poverty, or who are ultra vulnerably prone to systemic violence, inability to access basic social care benefits become a big barrier. And then the power hegemony that we have, in the society, the power hegemony, which does not sometimes prevent equality of access. The last thing that I want to say here right now, Ranjita and the panelists, is that sometimes of late, I'm seeing that the inability to break away from the double discrimination of stereotypes. What I mean by this is that, we have families who are caregivers. We have children of, mentally ill people in our own setup who are caregivers. They get double discriminated. They get double stigmatized, and that's very tragic, because here are people who are trying to forge out of the family and community labeling of somebody being mentally ill, whether it is in a household, whether it's in a colony, whether it's in a community. In our own setups, we have, where we have certain homes, they'll say, oh, andha pakkam illaya, I'm sorry, I'm saying it in Tamil, that side, those are all people living with mental illness. So you get totally brandished. And sometimes I feel family and the children have to bear the double brunt of, of discrimination. So lack of access to, lack of access maybe to employment or to education and so on and so forth. Well, I'm going to stop here because this can go on and maybe have someone else come in with their perspective.
I think Sadaf can also talk about a sort of intersectional approach of how these variables in our thing of, gender and caste and creed and so on can also interplay and create situations in which, mental health is affected. And you work with LGBTQI people. Can you talk about that experience in this context?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I was just thinking of how what Dr. Lakshmi said, it does tie into people who can somehow get care, you know. So obviously there's a big barrier of people who can't get care. But even if somehow somebody has the finances or there is an NGO, somehow they get care. These ideas of like weakness, these ideas of not socially sort of admitting that these structures cause issues are so internalized in people also who come for care, right? Like you are growing up in this society, so you start to believe in these ideas. So, you know, there will be somebody who might have had like, say, some really like bad childhood, like, you know, maybe parents were themselves affected by something, so they couldn't provide a safe childhood. And so it's so internalized that I'm supposed to make the best of my life because I'm materially okay, that even to get to a point of saying, wait, there was inequality, I didn't have a safe childhood, or wait, like I'm marginalized because of gender or sexuality, and that is something that will cause issues. So, you know, even for people who can access care, these discourses are so internalized that to work with those takes a very long time to say that no, these are big things that happen, or these are ideas that marginalize you, and we have to look at them as something that's working against us, because it's sold to people, right? Like if you work hard, you know, if only you could work hard, things would be fine. So I feel like the system then is obviously inside the person, because the person is existing in this society, and then the system inside the person is what I think perpetuates it. And the other thing I feel is like, because of these ideas of not acknowledging the gap, not acknowledging the role of systems, we are highly sort of curative in our work, right? Like we hardly do any preventive work, which I feel again sort of downplays what we could have done. Like, you know, there are some countries which are experimenting with early intervention or talking about mental health in school itself and stuff like that. And there's so much sort of reduction in the treatment gap that you can do, right? Because of that, because you know, like if a country has gone through partition 60-70 years ago, there is going to be a lot of trauma in those generations. You know that it's not like something which is surprising, and then therefore their kids are going to have some impact of that. So I feel like our focus on the curative part actually increases, you know, by the time you're waiting for them to reach a hospital or a clinic, you know, there's so much you could have done if you were directly working with families or community or schools. So I feel the internalization and the fact that we wait for people to become quote unquote patients and then need help in a very serious way, I feel that increases a lot of the load. And then you can only have specialist care, because by that time, you know, the person needs specialist care. Whereas if we started earlier, we could have a range of care, you know, maybe buddy systems and barefoot counselors, all of those could also help us. But because we wait for people to get so much severely ill, then unfortunately we require more specialists, which we don't have. So then that kind of cycle feeds into itself.
Rachna, do you want to talk about how this dynamic sort of plays out in the corporate space?
Sure. Yeah, I think before I move to the corporate space, Ranjita, I'd also like to just speak about how the sense of enforced normalcy that the world puts on everybody, whether you're queer, whether you are whether you are on the autism spectrum, any identity that steers away from normalcy is I feel like the root of chaos internally for a person and how society responds to them. So, you know, personally, I've also experienced, early trauma in early childhood, which led me to experience, mental health challenges. And from my privilege, I have been able to get support, but it was still a fight, because I mean, in a corporate world, or even early on when I, was at TIS and I worked with NGOs, I think there is so much of burden on a person who's experiencing trauma to constantly think that they are strong, especially if you're a woman, because anyway, for a woman to go up a ladder, whether it's in a corporate or anywhere else, and then if you're queer, it gets worse. So every layer of, inequality just makes it harder for a lot of people to access care. So yeah, and I think in a corporate setting, things definitely are changing, but I still think that, it's still a very top-down approach that we are having to adopt, simply because there aren't enough conversations. And I don't think a lot of corporates in India are a safe space right now, right? For example, we haven't institutionalized I mean, there's no policy of mental health leaves. People would still rather say that they have a stomach ache or they have food poisoning, but they may actually be having a panic attack in their house. So, it's not enough to just have employee assistance programs. I think everybody has to work towards creating these safe spaces. So it is still quite challenging.
That's an interesting thing that you pointed out, that every layer of your sort of identity kind of adds to the thing. So there are studies that say that, economic stressors can contribute to poor mental health, and then your environmental factors contribute to poor mental health. So it's a kind of cyclical thing. It's not just that, you are in this situation, you have a mental health problem, you can't access care, but it's also that structure itself causes harm to your mental health. So Dr. Lakshmi perhaps would like to say something on that.
Sure, let me attempt. Mental health, as you're saying, I think, Ranjita, does not happen in isolation. That's what I hear you saying. Yeah, it does not happen in isolation. Mental health impacts and is impacted upon, by several factors, sociological factors, as we said just now, economic factors largely, or political factors. I mean, politics has really invaded into our lives like never before. And you can't ignore that. You may say I'm apolitical, but somewhere, it does play a role in our lives. And then, of course, the environment. That's where, when we're, and there is so much more. I think also the fact that there is sometimes with some people, there is a whole spiritual ennui, I mean, absolutely feeling that I don't have anyone to resort to. When I say spiritual, I mean, a larger faith and a larger belief and a larger hope in beyond the systems. So when we talk about these, of course, economic factors are more telling because they're material and they're tangible and they're here for us to see. You have a job today, you don't have a job tomorrow. Your family is in distress because there's only one earning member who has to feed 5 people. Or, you could relocate, and look what the pandemic has done. As much as people like to call it the shadow pandemic, but mental health has come out of the, really has come out in the forefront. And look at the social, injustices that have been prevailing upon people, again, whether it is domestic violence, whether it is child abuse, or whether it's ignoring elder care, elderly care. So in every which way, I think mental health does not happen in isolation. It's not a variable that you can pull out of other realistic sociological, economic, and political factors that play an integral part of our lives.
Right. Nandini, would you want to talk about your experiences as a peer educator and how you see mental health and things like poverty and, being a woman, all of that kind of affecting a person's mental health, or what are your experiences in that area?
Ma'am, if a person is a lady means, and due to poverty, they may get a lot of mental illness. Then, due to sexual impact, for example, father using as a doctor sexually abusement, due to that, many of the ladies are getting the mental illness. To overcome this problem, we have to give treatment at the starting itself. If we didn't give the treatment at the starting itself, means they are dealing by their family members in the community, not giving a right treatment for them. More than that, if we find this problem at the starting stage, means it will be very easy for us to give treatment for them. Not only mental illness, I'll say another one answer also. If a male is become as a transgender means, it's not given the equal importance for him or mental illness person, because they are disliked by the world. After disliking by the world, they are being separated apart from the other persons. They are treated as a lonely person
Yeah.
and not given any response to their feelings like that. For especially the person who are having mental illness, I'm taking care of them. Uh, I'm taking care of them in their social entitlements. That's only my work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if you see means ration card, election card, Aadhaar card, bank passbook. We have to get a disability card for a mental person. If you apply for that, means they are asking bank passbook. They say that we are not having Aadhaar card. Without Aadhaar card, we can't get the bank passbook. We are helping our each and every client with all the social entitlement to be which are the rights to be received by them.
Yeah.
That and all our banning is doing very well, ma'am. I'm doing with the help of Mr. Karyapan sir, Gajalashmi ma'am, and Kavita ma'am, along with my case manager Keetana.
Okay. Thanks, Nandini.
I just was wondering if we can ask Nandini. She's also been a peer leader, I think, when you asked this question. So maybe to simplify it with, as a peer leader in the community in Kovalam that she works, how how is she as a role model? How does she influence people to, seek all the requisite, entitlements, benefits, etc. that persons with, mental health issues may want to seek. So as நீங்க எப்படி இன்ஸ்பயர் பண்றீங்க? நீங்க பியர் லீடர், அங்க you're a peer leader. நீங்க வந்து நிறைய பேருக்கு பேசுவேன் இந்த சிஎஸ்என்எல் இதுல வந்து நீங்க phones எடுத்துட்டு she's been responding to a lot of telecalls, etc. entering data. So அந்த எக்ஸ்பீரியன்ஸ், அந்த நீங்க என்ன மாதிரி ஒரு உற்சாகத்தை வந்து லீடர்ஷிப் குவாலிட்டிஸ் எப்படி நீங்க முந்துக்கு you're trying to bring it out. Can you explain that, Nandini, the work that you do where you are also a model, in the community for many people to see the kind of work you're doing. You're not just a Banyan person, but you're a peer leader.
Ma'am, at the starting, I was having the training from Banyan. After that, I developed myself as a peer leader by attending the calls. I'll get the information from the clients. They will say that I'm not having the particular social entitlement for me. Then I'll inform to Karyapan sir, and I'll give responsible person for them with the help of Nalam workers who will help them to get their social entitlements. Or if they didn't get their medicine means, I'll inform to Mr. Thamarasan for sending the courier through medicines. Whatever help they are in need, I am ready to serve them at any time. Even they will have a call for me at 10:30 at night and all. 10:30 at night and all. I won't get whatever time they are calling. I am ready to serve them. That's my first plan.
Nandini, have you seen that any of the people that you work with in the community in Kovalam, are they seeing you and seeing you as an inspiration and saying that, okay, nanu vandu velaiku pola, nanu vandu I can do things and accomplish things and solite?
I don't know certainly. If they are willing to accept me as a peer leader and they are liking me as a leader means, I'm really ready to give them training, or I'm ready to give them any help what they are in need. Nobody has said to me till today that
okay.
Help them at any time.
Nandini, what are the problems that they face in getting entitlements? Why are they not able to get?
Without Aadhaar card, we can't get any other entitlements for each and every citizen. Now, the citizenship is depend upon the Aadhaar card. Before and that, we depend upon the ration card. It's slowly developed and dependent upon the Aadhaar card. Many of them are not having Aadhaar card. Our Banyan is trying level best to get Aadhaar cards. We are taking them to Tirupur office, e-Seva. After we are taking to e-Seva scheme, we are taking photos, our hand fingerprints, eyelid photos. After that, we are getting our Aadhaar card. With that Aadhaar card, only we are helping each and everybody to get their ration card, PAN card, bank passbook. For this, I'm helping only.
Okay.
Indirectly, I'm a leader for each and everybody. Directly, I don't know how many people are accepting me as a leader. indirectly, many of them are. I'm
we are accepting you, Nandini, as leader, as our leader.
Thank you, man.
Ranjita, I also wanted to add, since we were talking about inequality, right? So there is a sense of like when you're like people around you, like say your family, etc., share the same identity. Like say if you're a minority religion, your family might prepare you a little bit of what that's going to feel like. Or same for like the class, caste, etc. I think when it comes to LGBT individuals, there's a double whammy over there, because you also don't have anything that your family can tell you. In fact, you have to hide it from the family first. You know, so I think that's a layer of minority stress which is additional for LGBT individuals, because you can't even have a hand holding from your family about how to deal with this inequality and still relate to the larger society, and your family might be the site of first violence towards that. So probably that is another layer that people from the margins of gender sexuality are going through.
Should we move on to the next section, which will talk about the role of various stakeholders? Rachna, beginning with you, what do you think corporates can do to support the mental health of employees, including providing reasonable accommodation? Like you had mentioned, leave for mental health reasons, which I think abroad some companies do. How do you think corporates in India can sort of provide that sort of environment for persons with mental illnesses?
So I think one is, see, if we're talking about corporates, I mean, we will assume that even if people's salaries aren't that great, they still at least have a job and have a sustainable income. That being said, therapy, access to psychiatrists is still very expensive. Even in Bombay, a place like Bombay, average is about 1,500 to 2,000 for a good therapist. And even, you know, and psychiatrists also start somewhere around 700 and go up to 4,000-5,000 if it's a celebrity, you know, like a celebrity psychiatrist or whatever. So I think that one is just basics to, if you can onboard a provider that can give access to employees, mental health, service access, that is one big step. But to the external world, and I speak here as a CSR practitioner, I think that mental health is still a very underfunded, cause in India. People still prefer to, and I think the stigma also impacts it, right? There's no easy wins in mental health. You cannot say you fed 1,000 people or educated kids. It's not very, it's not, the returns on it aren't that quick and tangible. So a lot of corporates do tend to shy away from that. I think we really need to have more corporates realizing that they need to start spending towards this, because those at the bottom of the pyramid who need access to care, prevention is something that we need to do, but even just basic access to critical care and crisis management, all of that requires funding. Also, I think corporates are in an interesting space, because beyond just grant funding, there is so much more we can do. For example, at the bank, we do constantly look for even social enterprises in the disability and mental health space. And in the past, we have supported a social enterprise that innovated and created a for-profit model of care where they were charging lesser from those who cannot afford it and more from those. So it was a hybrid model. So there's a lot that corporates can do since they are in a strategic position with a lot of, with workforce and employees who can be volunteers to support with the money needed to really make things happen, and with influence, because, large corporates definitely have the influence and voice, which is really needed for us to leverage if we should. For example, even if, say, corporates that have presence across rural India, even industries that are set up, they can, they are in a position of influencing community around them. If they were made aware, if we just educated people on how much wins can happen from a mental health perspective in the country. If they invested in mental health, then I think things would definitely start to change. But, we really need more corporates coming on board to do that.
And from the employment perspective as to reasonable accommodation, any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So I think that, I am not an expert on this, but personally, I can just share what has helped me and a few other people in the peer support groups that I also run. I think that educating people on the spectrum of mental health is important, because most times, I've realized that people don't support you not because they don't want to, but because they're scared and don't know what to do, right? So I've seen just small things like, creating allies in the corporate space. It doesn't take a lot to have a squad and train people to say that, okay, this is, emotional well-being is one thing, but these are signs that how do you give emotional first aid? Just like if they had a cut, you would run to get a first aid box, right? So if somebody has like a mental bruise, or they're having a meltdown, or they feel suicidal, what is how do you respond? Because we cannot expect counselors and psychiatrists to be there everywhere. So in a corporate, even, it's not enough to just say that you are a safe space if the people around you don't start behaving like they're a safe space, which is why that training and really sensitizing people, getting them to meet survivors is important. Because a lot of times, when you think mental illness, you think schizophrenia, you think very, very severe critical illnesses, which are obviously prevalent as well. But there are some things which, like high functioning depression or mood disorders, where you see a person perfectly normal, quote unquote normal, but then you can't see their mood swings, you can't see their, it's an intangible illness or condition. So there is, each one of us, I think every person in a corporate has the potential to become that ally, has the potential to be that first responder, but we need first responders. Otherwise, it's very hard to get, limited to HR or senior leadership to be doing that.
Right. Sadaf, do you want to talk about, as a service provider, you've touched upon this a little earlier when you talked about partition and all of that. How does intergenerational trauma play out in cultural groups that have been discriminated against for many years? And what trends have you seen in your practice?
Yeah. So most of the young people who are coming to me have had parents who either themselves have kind of come from a tougher background and become secure only in their own 30s, 40s, or have had a previous generation who's been that way. So one of the things is that there is a constant sense of my problems don't matter for the client. My problems don't matter because they are not dire problems. So one of the things is when one sees that one's parent has come from a more dire space of poverty or having moved, etc., there is this sense that my problem isn't big enough and I shouldn't be bothered by it. So there is a sense of discounting oneself only because of that. And maybe that has been the narrative at home, that what do you have to complain about? So that's one of the things that happens because of intergenerational trauma. Then there are certain patterns also, for example, if a family has seen a lot of poverty and scarcity, there is a sense of fear that things won't last, right? And that leads to certain rearing patterns. So maybe some very anxious parenting, some very controlling parenting might come. Or if you are a minority in a certain country, any minority, caste or anything, there is a sense that the world is a threat. It is not unreal. Maybe you have suffered persecution, so because of that, the sense that the children also have, which then makes them be very vigilant, right? And our nervous system is not meant to be vigilant all the time. So then they suffer a breaking point of some kind. So it's good in degrees, we can survive that, but when we are vigilant all the time, we can't survive that very easily. So then you have breakdowns or something else, something going wrong in relationships, concentration, etc. issues. So it can manifest differently in different people. So the sense of scarcity, so that my problems don't matter, the other being parenting patterns are certain way. And then the third very obvious one is parental pathology. So parents were so kind of into the whole survival aspect itself that they never got to pay attention to their own emotional well-being. And so there is pathology which never got any attention. And so living with a parent who is unwell, right, that also creates a lot of difficulties for young people or and then that is the relationship that they have seen, and so maybe there might be a lot of violence at home or something else, and then so they don't have good models of self as well as relationships. So that is something that I'm seeing in people who are coming to me.
Nandini, if I could ask Nandini, in your work as a peer leader, what kind of, you talked about how you help people get entitlements, right? What other help do they need? And do you think that people, what do you think stops a person from saying, எனக்கு ஒரு பிரச்சனை இருக்கு, நான் வந்து டாக்டர் பார்க்கணும்? What stops them, do you think?
Ma'am, especially maximum due to poverty, a lot of children are dropping their studies. Maximum number of parents are asking me whether our banyan will help them with studies. We are arranging them for scholarship for their studies till their college. Maximum, most of the people are completed their arts and science, engineering, medicine, collector, engineer, whatever their responsible studies they want to study. We are helping them with scholarship through our donators, by self. We are doing everything. Then mostly I am not criticizing the caste, but don't think ST people are there, no tribal people. They are changing their place from one place to other, so they are not able to give proper education for their children. They take their children along with them for their jobs. The children are losing their studies. So we are talking with each and every one of them. The education should be given for each and every children. Don't think of poverty and waste your children's life. We are having one worker and we are talking with each and every tribal people to give the education for each and everybody. Because of the povertyness also, we are the children are getting the mental illness problem. To overcome, we are spending scholarship for them and giving the proper education for them.
When you met somebody who has a mental health problem in the community, but they say, I don't want to see a doctor and so on. So what do you do then?
Some are saying like that, ma'am, they are not understanding about their problems. But we are keeping counseling for them many times, and we are making them to understand their problem, and we are making them to take their medicine properly at proper time through their caregivers. Other than sometimes we are taking as inpatient and we are giving them proper treatment and making them to come out of their problems. And we are seeing the family members to give the tablets at the correct minutes, after morning, after afternoon and night, like that. We are saying and sending them. If they stop their medicine without our knowledge, means they are getting the problem again. So we are saying we should take the medicine for mental illness lifelong, like sugar medicine, like BP medicine. We have to continuously take it. If we start, it's our mistake only, not the doctor's mistake. We are asking them again for counseling. We are giving counseling from them again and giving treatment for them.
Okay. You have seen, as you said, there are children who may have mental health problems, and sometimes the person has a mental health problem and then the family has to take care. What is the impact? Like, what is the burden that the caregiver feels in this situation? Do you think that they also struggle and have difficulties?
Especially, I have seen one client, how means morning he'll beat his mother and get rupees 300 and he'll go for putting snuff, tea, coffee, cigarette, drinks. If his mother is not having money, means he will beat her and he will ask him to go and beg and come money for me. He is doing it continuously. We are giving continuous counseling and now he is reduced after taking medicine. We feel very happy to see that person like this. Before he was torturing his mother, now he is cured very nicely after our counseling and our medicine.
Okay. Dr. Lakshmi, she's back? Yeah. So we were talking about how intergenerational trauma plays into people, being plays out when, people have been discriminated for generations. Also, as service providers, what are the trends that you kind of see? And how stigma perhaps affects accessing care, which I think Nandini has touched on also a little bit.
Yeah, sorry, I lost you for a bit because of the inclement weather here.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we are looking at, again, intergenerational, when we talk about the concept of intergenerational trauma, it's, it again refers to the fact that, this is almost like, secondary manifestation of whatever has happened to the primary caregivers or primary, family members or people. The reason being that I think for me, and I'm sure all of you here, the word trauma evict itself with, counseling or finding better recourses to making your life better. But what tends to happen is, I think the way the trends you see in intergenerational trauma is largely when you get fixated with, again, isms like, casteism, racism, and it almost becomes like, this is our lot, it is transmissible. It gets transmitted without maybe the second, third generation facing it. But like when you talked about the partition, and then we see the effects of partition, or even the effects of long-term war, or if you see the effects of history that continues over generations about the way in which women are treated, then it tends to become almost intergenerational. It moves from one generation to the other, also quote unquote through narratives and stories, I think this is a very powerful medium through which this gets translated, and you cannot deny it or defy it, and it's tough to live with it. You say, no, it happened to 3 generations ago, it won't happen to us. Because I think not only the stigma, but I think the anticipatory fear and anxiety becomes huge in, people who have faced multiple levels of trauma across generations due to several structural and systemic issues and barriers. I don't want to go into detail. It could be gender, it could be LGBTQI, it could be several aspects, but the fact that it's trickling down generations is in itself it trends because it's meant to remain there. What trends is something that, in any kind of situation, when you look at trend analysis, it trends because it is here to stay in some in some sense of the term. So I think, what do you do? I mean, my next question is, what do you do? If it is what you call as not direct, but it is indirect, sources of receiving the information and, manifesting effects of that trauma, then I think a lot of it is to deal with, with people where we try to segregate the issue from the individual. Many times the issue and the individual become integral to one. So you segregate the issue, because let me give you an example. Okay, we are this color, so we will get abused. I am this, I belong to this community. So it's this is a lot. So there is a, forced resignation. I think that is something we need to fight when we try to address any kind of trauma issues, direct or indirect.
Okay. I think because we may be a little tight on time, I'm just going to move ahead to the way forward section, if that's okay. Yeah. So starting with Rachna, you were talked about funding as a huge issue, right? Lack of funding rather. So what do you think are ways in which we can improve funding for mental health services?
So I think that, even if we see corporates not directly funding only preventative or access to care, I think a lot of existing programs and livelihoods, in any sector you look at, there is scope to make those inclusive and include persons living with mental illness. Often I see that disability programs are separate and mental health programs are separate, and livelihood, happens there.
Yeah.
I don't really see inclusion happening because a person is a woman or whatever they choose to identify as first, and their mental illness or disability is a secondary label. I mean, we're all human first. So I definitely find that a lot of nonprofits themselves need to be more educated, because when we work in communities, we realize that, we can't exclude people out from working in your vocational training center or getting them jobs. It is going to be harder. It may be harder because those nonprofits may not know how to work with people with mental health conditions. So I think there is a lot of potential to do things collaboratively, right? And I think that the Banyan has been doing that well. We need more Banyans. We need more organizations that are going to influence those working in the social sector to mainstream mental health and include it as part of any intervention, really, so that nobody gets left out. And definitely, like I said before, more funding to go towards, to go towards mental health programs. So we need to be speaking to more CSR leaders, HR leaders, or whoever it is that is really, even CEOs, whoever it is in corporates that are really influencing what the spend is on. Need to be spoken to. I don't think we can wait anymore to see who's going to decide to change. And I think Mariwala is doing some great work. We do have queer affirmative trainings that Mariwala is leading. That is great, because again, we're not saying that we need a separate cadre of people to only treat or therapize those of us who are on a spectrum of whatever condition, but we're saying that each therapist or each counselor, it is their responsibility to educate themselves. So again, funding such programs, that even trauma-focused programs, there is a lot of scope, but I think corporates do need to be educated, and that role of educating them is definitely on the organizations that are leading this on ground.
If I can come in here, if you don't mind, not from the corporate world, but somebody who receives from the corporate world, and and just very, very quickly, just to add to what Rachna is saying, that whether it's corporate stakeholders or members of the civil society or whatever, I feel they mean well, to be honest. And this is not to get more funds from anyone out here, but I think it requires us also, the mental health providers, the mental health, those of us who work in mental health very actively, sometimes takes a little to show a direction also, because mental money is into. We need to also, like she said, educate, as in, we can't talk about returns of investment immediately. That's very important for us to tell them honestly and directly. And where should we put our money in is a big question that's always deliberated, discussed, and asked before a program is taken up. And it's our onus, I think, to talk about long-term sustainability and no showcase models, whether it's for us ECRC or a Home Again, or we have fellowships, we have peer leaders, whether we are training, whether we are doing grassroots level work, developing community mental health leaders. So where should we put our monies in is a very big question. So we need to say these things don't happen overnight. It's sustainability from our end and the sustainability of the funder. And therefore staying with the cause, staying with the cause and seeing it through. And I think it also becomes, not I give you the money and you show me the deal kind of stuff. I think it has to be collaborative. And even at that level, it should be very, very inclusive, I feel.
Right. I just want we need to quickly wrap up. So this is the penultimate question. So how do we incorporate a right-based approach to mental health services? This is to Sadaf and Dr. Lakshmi. Sadaf, you want to go first?
So I think it's like a multi-layered thing that we'll need to do, because the reason for currently things not being rights-based is not just stigma, but also the priority. Like if we look at our health budget of the country, and then what portion of that goes to mental health, it just goes to 2 or 3 big institutions, right?
Yeah.
So, so it's about the priority setting. I think it's about the stigma, and I feel like we need a revamp of the syllabus for everybody who's going to attend to mental health needs, because almost all our syllabuses are very archaic, except for 2-3 institutions. But psychiatrists and counseling students may still get like a more responsive study, but psychiatrists, general practitioners see a lot of people who might just be stressed, but they don't know that, or they're not trained to handle that. So I feel like we need a rehaul in the education. We definitely need licensing, because as much as the need for mental health is coming up, the quackery is also coming up, so we need a sort of like very strict program of like who can practice, who cannot, with which kind of population. Like we don't need a clinical psychologist doing everything. But then can we differentiate who can work with whom, and then very fast and quick action to be taken, because otherwise people have no resolution apart from just going to the local high court, which then takes time. People are filing now, but it's such a long process. So we need to have this multi-pronged approach for more rights-based services.
Dr. Lakshmi?
I'll just add 2-3 points. One is, of course, the fact that the Constitution gives its own rights, irrespective of whether you're mentally ill or not. You have rights to every individual who belongs to this, let us say, this country, and there are rights, therefore, therein that are given. And many times we don't even look at that. Mental health rights must not again become very, very exclusive. That I have a mental health issue, therefore I have right. But I also believe in the larger scheme of things, maybe going a little out of the context, but the fact that, we need to also have, forcible voices from user survivors, caregivers, to seek rights. For that, I think a lot of education, training, etc. is required, because many times, we are so involved with, the issue at hand that we disclaim what is there for us. Peer advocacy and lobbying is, I think, a very, very important way, and there are laws, but I think many times we also need being very, very pedantic here, but good mental health rights, legal counsel and legal experts to show you that this is given. You don't have to fight for it. Everybody doesn't have to go into an activist role and stand on the streets, but what is there, bring it up to the forefront and claim that as yours. I think the moment we claim something as ours, I think we take ownership of that. I think mental health rights, or rights for any individual, belongs to those who can take responsibility and ownership, not merely the people who are going through their you don't have to have somebody advocate it for you. That's what I mean. I don't have to fight for your rights. We fight together. We ask for it together. I think that's important. And one of the other things, as I said, which is, my mind is going there, but I just want to make the point, is that we have to make, public health systems responsible in this country. I think that the problem that we are having across all kinds of issues, the public health system is unreachable. We have a right to make it reachable to us. We have a right to seek for its functionality. Whether it is remote places, whether it is a PHC, whether it is a district mental health program, whether it's a tertiary care center or a temporary, these are when rights, when they get articulated well, become services, right? After all, through rights, we are asking for services. So I think it's important. Our privileges, our entitlements are all that we are asking for rights. For example, reasonable accommodation, which is much debated, is a right. It doesn't have to be enshrined in the Mental Health Care Act of 2017. It's there. For instance, when you talk about advance directive, it's a right. That I decide how I'm going to want to be treated and so on. So that's where I thought, I look at rights.
Okay. Last question before after that, I'm just going to go through some of the questions that were sent in advance. But the last question is to Nandini. Nandini, how do you think mental health services can be improved?
in our environment, we are seeing a day-to-day life mental illness problem. We should not force the mentally illness person by giving medicine or putting injection or tying up with the string. We should give them freedom for them also. We should give equal rights to them also. We should give study. We should give studies for them and make them to come up their life. We should tap their back to come up their life. We should not say inequality. Say each and every problem is because of that mentally affected people only. This will make people to hurt in their heart, and they will not able to come up in the life. We should tap them to come up in life. If I alone just to shake my hand means there will be no nice. If everybody join to give a clap means there will be certainly nice ideas to promote mental illness person. Then moreover, we should take concentrate on each and every person. In our banding, we are concentrating maximum more than we are having many branches. We are concentrating more and more on clients. Not only by giving medicine, we are going and meeting them. If they are a studying person, means we are helping them for their studies. If they are in need of medicine, means we are sending them in correct time. We are asking them to come at the correct time for monthly injection. That also, if they are willing, only we are putting injection or tablet. If they are not doing it, we are not forcing them. Certainly, we should not force a mental illness person for you are a mental illness person. You should put the tablet. You should take it. If they are willing, it, we can do. Or we should give counseling to make them calm. After that, only we should give injection or tablet. We should not force them by giving them by mixing them in milk or in food without knowing. They are finding out at one time. I have seen many of them. They find it one time. They'll throw the they'll throw the food, or they'll keep the tablet under their tongue. They'll drink water in front of everybody of us. After that, after we go, like they do. So we should not force them. We should give freedom for them.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. I'm just going to ask some of the questions that were sent in advance. Some of them are, I think we would have already dealt with in the talk. One or two of them I'm just going to pick out. One is, how has the pandemic impacted the mental health of teenagers and young generations, and what do parents and families need to be mindful about with their loved ones? This is from Madhavi Naik in Mumbai. Sadaf, do you want to take this?
Can you repeat the question once?
How has the pandemic impacted the mental health of teenagers and younger people, and what should families and parents be mindful of?
Yeah, incidentally, I saw a few like teenagers and young kids in the last few months, and I feel like one of the biggest thing is that there is for this age group, the social group is so important, and suddenly overnight they haven't been able to see their peers for so long, right? Especially when the peak waves come and they are just at home, not even going down to play. And I think that for that particular age group, obviously for everyone, but for that age group which is going through identity formation years, it's so important to be in touch with their peers, that it's really affecting their sense of identity, and therefore they are losing the sense of why are my studies even important. And that is distressing the parents, that you know, like you don't even have to go to school, so like you should be able to just study and like live a good life, like even your commute has gone out. So that is where the difficulty is coming in, where you know their nervous system wise irregulated, because they're not getting to step out, getting to see their friends, getting to see their peers, and therefore maybe they're staying up late, not interested in studies, etc. But that brings up a panic response in the parents. So I think the work is in understanding that even children or young people are surviving a pandemic and losing out on major things while they survive these 2 years. And so maybe, you know, maybe reducing expectations for a bit on the learning side of things, you know, and just saying that how can I support my child emotionally through this time and reduce some of the pressure to achieve, at least for these 2 years. I think that is something that is not there as an understanding. And then a lot of the times they are witness to more happening at home now that they are home. So, you know, if like family issues or fights or violence, etc., was not that visible earlier, now it's more visible because children are there 24/7. So even their sense of what is my family, how well is it, how much can I trust it, is getting questioned. So a lot of families are also realizing their patterns. So in case you are realizing as a family not to shrug it under the rug and, you know, not do anything, but maybe this is a good time to get help as a whole family unit. So these are things I feel like if we work on ourselves as a couple or as a parental unit, and if we release some of the expectations of learning and achievement and just help our kids survive emotionally, I think that will be a huge help.
Okay. I've got a question from, there's one from Pooja Bilal from Mumbai and another from Krishna Iyer, also from Mumbai. So I'm just, both of them are about corporates and employees. So I'm just going to combine them. For Rachna, this one, Pooja is asking, people with mental health issues are always considered as people who lack responsibility or who cannot handle challenges, and their chances of performance is always considered as low. How can corporates bring a change? While Krishna has asked, how does a corporate offer anonymity to the employee seeking help with mental health?
So the first question to Pooja, yeah, I mean, you know, like I had shared before, there's a long way that corporates need to go. I think one is HR definitely needs to be more sensitized. I think them leading the employee assistance program itself can scare people because it's HR and they're the ones that are the, you know, are responsible for appraisal. I think Sadaf also mentioned this in the chat. So I think that, you know, they are, you know, like you said, Sadaf, they are separate things. I think that maybe forming a squad where it's not only HR, where it is a group of people who are across functions and who are more empathetic and compassionate, getting them to lead the employee mental health program with HR may be more, you know, it may be more beneficial because people need to trust you. Now, on the confidentiality piece, any service provider, they do assure confidentiality. So even if you do sign them on, you know, most EAP providers, I think all of them do, you know, do assure that. I think Dr. Lakshmi Ravikant would be a better person to answer this, only because you have been you know, worked as an EAP provider. So how corporates, you know, is there any suggestions for how corporates can de-link productivity and a person's mental health and have them, you know, people shouldn't be judged for their productivity simply because they have a label of a mental health issue.
Rachna, I've never been an EAP provider as such, but anyway, I worked in my personal capacity and also from the point of view of the BAM. You know, as you recently also attended, or you know, some of the programs that we've had with other, you know, meaningful corporates, where without having to divulge, but you know, actually, if you look at it from the point of a user point of view, only 30 to 35% of people use the EAP provision, in by and large, as in terms of statistics. That could be due to many reasons. It's because a certain function like HR is always the mediator between the user and the provider. And while confidentiality, etc., are granted in a sense, there is always a doubt between, you know, there's always a doubt. Particularly for the person who's using these services. So one of the things, you know, that we had recently done some work, it almost said that you improvision a panel, you know, Rachna said a multifunctional panel. You have more, again, you have a panel of couple of people who are your referral sources, you know, whom you can, you know, go to. In the sense, so the corporates really don't enter into the thing. They're providing you referral sources, but with a certain caveat that, you know, a person can't, you know, obviously charge. Sometimes what happens is people go through these referral sources and without questions being asked, they bill the company to, you know, whatever services they have sought. So it's a company does not have. There is a there is a clause for not to breach confidentiality, which is undersigned by the provider, the user, and the company. So the idea is to enable people to receive help without wanting to know, what kind of help a person is reaching to, and delinking it from productivity. Not to say that, to delink it from productivity. So it could mean more leisure time, as we said earlier. It could mean more reasonable accommodation in terms of hours of work, place of work, time of work. So the whole idea is a corporate entity doesn't become the big brother trying to monitor the services that the company is trying to provide. These are all from very recent conversations and dialogues that we've been happening with other companies, where you're not diluting the role of EAP. EAP is good in certain ways, but if you have maybe long-term and more difficult issues, then EAP should not be the ideal provider, is the think now. That's the think.
Okay, the last question is from the chat here, which was from Shagun, saying, how do you tackle intergenerational trauma on a community level? So I think that was for Sadaf and Dr. Lakshmi.
We answered it in the chat.
I think I hear.
Okay, fine.
Kind of.
Okay, then I'll just finish with the last one. This is from Arushi Srivastava from Bhopal. How can we highlight the importance of mental health towards the older generation, as some might have been victim or ignorant about it during their younger days? Sadaf, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think usually because of the younger generation being more aware, you might, at least when you see the private practice space, you might see them coming in, or you might see them bringing in their parents or grandparents or whatever. So I think maybe utilizing the fact that this generation has more access to media, we can try to reach the older generation through them. Nonetheless, I think there are ways to directly reach that generation also. I feel like if we speak in mediums and ways that they can find accessible, I feel like we'll be able to speak directly to them, So there are things that we could do at a community level. Like a lot of older people like to go for satsangs and such religious groups. So if there is a NGO or a group working in such a space, they could go and do like a small little awareness in such spaces, like temples, religious places, any sort of gathering around such things. But they like to go for their own mental peace. We could go and speak in such places. So I feel like speaking in their language, going where they are likely to be, I feel like that might work better. And the other one would be like reach their sort of younger people. So if you're using the online mediums, maybe try to speak to the younger population, and maybe that could be a way to create awareness as well.
Okay. And I think we are done.
I think younger people must spend more time with older people, if I can say so. Wherever possible, because I'm telling you, loneliness, I mean, everything doesn't have to be mental illness, right?
Yeah, it's loneliness, lack of meaning.
Many times it's loneliness, lack of meaning, people being bereft of partners, or children being away. Cause a lot of difficulty for elderly people. There may be organizations, there may be agencies, but it's agentic.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is any kind of help that we get from outsources all the time is agentic. So it's to build a community, to build a neighborhood. I think, I have people who say, I think my mother or grandmother, somebody's having menopause issues, hence, mentally not so well. But there is no history taking whether they had any kind of issues earlier in life, because somehow, it's like maa retire nahi hoti hai, still he or she, even men, go through acute symptoms of feeling anxious and lonely and depressive. And I think for them, they also like to work with non-professional providers, if I can say so. So I think I don't know how it will be done, but I think it's a way to look at how can we, have our younger generation be in much more contact with the older generation, because I think that's what, it's one of fixing a solution, giving a solution to a problem. Those are sometimes quick fixes, I think. Having animals, having pets, and all of that. But what is the core? What is the core that people, who are older are going through? I think that's something that we really need to understand. As much as there's so much written about it. Elderly care and geriatric, counseling. With disabilities as they get older, with dementia and Alzheimer's, are also extremely difficult to deal with.
Okay, so I think we have run out of time now. Namrata, you want to step in?
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending the webinar today on a very important day, which is World Mental Health Day. I also want to thank all the panelists and the moderator, Dr. Lakshmi, Nandini, Rachna, Sadaf, and Ranjita. Thank you for taking our time today and participating in such a wonderful and interesting discussion. If you want to know more information, you can obviously check out our website, and this will be promoting the work that we do in BAM, and in even Guftagoo Therapy. You can also check out our social media handles, and we'll be sharing clips from this webinar very soon. So in case you've missed it, if your friends or family were going to attend it but weren't able to, you can definitely check it out on social media. We will also be posting the webinar on YouTube, so you can definitely watch it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye. Bye, Nandini.